Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. It's a milestone, episode 50 of Central Booking, and I get to spend it in the virtual company of critically acclaimed author Elle Marr, who Publishers Weekly calls a writer to watch. Elle is the author of last year's #1 Amazon bestseller, The Missing Sister, which was featured in Woman's World and named one of Pop Sugar's 31 thrillers of 2020. Her second novel, Lies We Bury, comes out on April 1st from Thomas and Mercer. The book introduces Marissa Moe, a young woman who was born and raised in captivity but has since forged a new identity, Claire Lou, as an adult. As the new photographer for the Portland Post, she's become a familiar face at crime scenes, but when a serial killer starts taunting her with messages and mementos from her past, she's forced to re-examine a history she'd rather forget. It's just the type of story Elle Marr likes to tell, one that features a complex female heroine of Asian American origin who must summon her physical and emotional strength if she hopes to triumph over travails. A first-generation Chinese American, Elle is originally from Sacramento and graduated from UC San Diego before moving to France, where she earned a master's degree from Paris's world-class Sorbonne University. While The Missing Sister drew on the author's time there, Lies We Bury is set in Oregon, where Elle and her family now make their home. Kirkus gave the book a starred review, calling it a deep, deep dive into unspeakable memories and their unimaginably shocking legacy. Speaking of deep dives, Elle Marr is about to unearth the truth behind Lies We Bury, so let's get digging. Hey everybody, welcome to a milestone episode of Central Booking number 50, if you can believe it. Today I'm really excited to be in the virtual company of Amazon charts bestselling author Elle Marr, whose second suspense novel, Lies We Bury, comes out, no joke, on April 1st from Thomas and Mercer. So welcome to the show, Elle. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you so much, John. I am excited to be here. No joke, April Fool's is my release date for Lies We Bury. I'm very excited about it.
That's kind of awesome, actually.
It's
and
fun.
For people paying attention, it's a Thursday, so it's not like the normal Tuesday, so it's very special. You're like doubly special, which I think is great.
I'll
Seems
take that.
appropriate for your second book, right?
Couldn't agree more.
Awesome. So I figured I like to ask people to sort of give me the elevator pitch for the book, because sometimes what you say and what I read into it and the publisher's blurb, they can be three completely different things. So let's just pretend that we're stepping into an elevator and taking our audience with us, and you have that time to pitch us on this book.
I love that. Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity. I would say when I start thinking about writing a book, I think about ideas or headlines that have stuck with me over the years. And true crime headlines are absolutely what do that. And so this book, Lies We Bury, takes its inspiration from some of the most heinous true crime headlines, crimes of false imprisonment, and fast forwards those from that moment to 20 years in the future to really dig into what happened to the survivors after they escaped that awful situation, and how they move forward from that trauma or maybe choose not to. So Lies We Bury follows Marissa Moe, who was born into captivity in a basement where she lived for 7 years. And then flash forward, the story begins with her 20 years later, when she starts receiving notes from someone, and when items from her childhood are beginning to turn up at crime scenes. And I'm speaking very slowly because I too don't want to give any spoilers, but that's the gist of Lies We Bury. I hope readers are intrigued by it.
Sure, who wouldn't want to read that book? That's a that's a great pitch. If I hadn't already read it, I would want to read it.
Thank you.
So I did want to ask you about your protagonist, Marissa Moe, and it's not a spoiler to say, just in case I use the names interchangeably, she also goes by Claire, which is her middle name, just to have some semblance of anonymity, given her past. But I wanted to ask you about her because, you write really strong, complex female protagonists, and she's somebody who's been largely shaped by her past. So can you tell us, how those strengths and vulnerabilities from that experience sort of shape her character and the ways that you think she's sort of representative of an every woman or an every person?
Oh, that's a great question. I really hope that's the case. I definitely tried to. I like writing. I like writing darker stories, but I think readers will also hopefully recognize the optimism that's in them. And so, to your point, I tried to craft really strong female characters who are broken and damaged because I think everyone is on some level, not necessarily as catastrophically as some of my characters are, but I think everyone has a little bit of hurt that's maybe gone on a little too long. Um, so I really try to create complex three-dimensional characters that sometimes are crabby and other times are redeemable. So yeah, hopefully I land somewhere in the middle of that.
Sure, there's realism for you, right? Who's not a little bit crabby these days?
Right,
Um,
fair.
Sure. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit more about Marissa Claire. So she accepts a job as a crime photographer for the Portland Post. And this sort of has both emotional and logistical implications. So I'm wondering if you can tell us how the role of photographer both helps to sort of legitimize her sleuthing, but also provides us, some psychological insights into her character.
Yeah, from a craft perspective, I really needed her to be near these crime scenes. I didn't know what her profession was when I started writing Lies We Bury, but I knew I needed her to be close, and I wanted to give her something that would also drive her personally. Not that she was just accepting a gig for money, but that she personally felt some passion for photography, or I played around with a few ideas at first, but ultimately she's got this personal arc of really coming into her skill and talent as a photographer and learning how to um, I guess, make money from that as well, because we've all got to live. And ideally, we make money from our passions, or we're able to pursue something that fulfills us, that also leads to income. So she was at that nexus of those two ideals. And then I also really liked the idea of her having some kind of barrier between herself and the crime scenes, which were altogether are altogether too familiar to her. She sees her past in these crime scenes, which have nothing to do with her. She's not, she doesn't know the victims or the locales, as she's just moved to Portland, Oregon. Um, but nonetheless, those situations caused her to reflect back on her past and to dredge up these memories, both deliberately and unintentionally. So photography, I thought, was a really cool medium in that she could still hide behind this lens and have that barrier between her and whatever she was photographing.
Sure.
Yeah, I thought that was something I stumbled upon that I was like very proud of myself for.
Yeah, that was brilliant. It's one of those things that, it doesn't necessarily strike you right away as a reader, and then you realize that there's so many layers and textures to it. So I thought that was, really awesome psychologically, but also to give her a reason to be in all these crime scenes. And so, you already talked a little bit about trauma and characters surviving trauma and how that sort of informs them. But I wanted to ask you because Marissa has two sisters or half sisters, Janessa and Lily, who sort of went through that experience in captivity with her. And each one of those characters came out of it differently. So I wanted to ask, how it was that you wanted to use those characters to show sort of the different manifestations of trauma.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I attempted to do. I hope the reader will agree with you. I did a lot of research actually on children and the various points at which they are more malleable, I guess, cerebrally. I mean, in the sense that like kids are able to bounce back from trauma much quicker depending on their age. And so Lily, we see she manifests the trauma that they all experienced and then the years following the trauma in trying to adjust to the outside world and to a quote normal life, much differently than her older sisters. Um, her memories are murkier. I think more so her trauma, the way that manifests in her adult life, is the result of the after years of the years post captivity and the struggle that they all underwent managing all of that, processing everything that they went through. And then the older sisters, Marissa or Claire and Janessa, I really wanted to highlight how two people can experience the same thing or be in the same room for something and then have completely different recollections of certain events. Something that I really explored in my debut, The Missing Sister, is that memory is so fluid. Eyewitness accounts are, of course, not remotely reliable in hindsight or after, dozens of studies have shown. It's really remarkable how much we can feel so with such certainty that something happened. But if someone were to view a film of that same event, we would recognize that we remembered something completely wrong. And so I tried to explore that a little more with the older sisters, in giving them each their valid experience, but also demonstrating that it's dangerous to say that we know what happened. It's dangerous to really draw a line in the sand. And the story kind of evolves from there. It really explores that.
Sure. So you could say it's a real mind bender.
I tried, at least.
It totally is. And so I wanted to ask you too, and again, this is something that you sort of briefly touched upon, I think maybe when you were giving your elevator pitch, but there is sort of a sub-theme about, our universal fascination with crime, and it's almost meta in a way because of course it's a crime novel and we're exploring crime and what it means to us. So I was wondering if you can tell us how that informed the novel, but also the lens through which Marissa or Claire tends to see the world around her.
Interesting. Those are two very distinct questions. I think that we are obsessed with true crime, as evidenced by the flourishing Netflix shows. There's a whole section on true crime. If you like true crime, you'll like these 12, shows. And I certainly fall into that category of viewer. I'm fascinated by certain true crime headlines, as I think we all are, and that we're all rubbernecking at, whatever horrifying event or salacious event just occurred. But I'm always intrigued by the people behind them, of why those crimes occurred, what drove that person to do that. So I think there was I'm going to forget the name right now, but there is maybe it's called I Am a Killer. It's a Netflix show. And it provides kind of features on death row inmates, and they explain why they committed their crimes or their murders. And I think that was huge. Like when the pandemic just began, when everyone was quarantining, I think that was trending for weeks. And I watched that myself. I think that's really, the popularity of those shows really demonstrates our fascination and fear of those situations. Which then brings me to the second part of your question. Marissa, I think, is done with that. Considering she's been the subject of that fascination her whole life, she's very much uninterested in it, and she's trying to move past it to the best of her ability. And she's really been resentful of stigmas that have followed her throughout her life, as well as stigmas that she's placed on herself, being the product of her mother's abduction and assault.
Sure. Yeah, and it's just an interesting contrast in the books because, like you said, the poor woman, she can't get away from it. Everybody else does not want to let it go, and she's doing everything she can to let it go, just to have it, thrown back in her face. And it's interesting too because we are also consumed by crime, and it really, really is fascinating. I mean, I've grown up too, and then you think, oh, well, this really happened. It's real people, real tragedy. So what is the point of normal versus salacious? But probably a conversation for another day. And um, so I wanted to ask you too. So both of your books are really entrenched in their settings, and maybe we'll come back to The Missing Sister later if we have a little bit of time for that. But I wanted to ask you how you see place is enhancing plot and how sort of your discovery of Portland, Oregon worked its way into this book, because there are great, bars, you have the Shanghai tunnels. So a lot of that gets woven into the book, and knowing that you've, lived in your settings, I bet gives that a more, obviously an intimate sense of familiarity.
Absolutely, yes. I think that setting is so important. I tend to view setting as a character all by itself. I think so much of our actions are determined by the weather, or there's such a thing as seasonal affective disorder. Whether or not you're living close to the ocean, like that might, a lot of people tend to feel affected by just being next to that constant. It's very affecting. And so I try to create all of my characters in a three-dimensional fashion, and the same goes for my settings. Portland is such a special city. It's so fun. And it's got a lot of really great quirks that I tried to bring to Lies We Bury. I have said this about my debut, The Missing Sister, and I'll say it about Lies We Bury. I wrote each story as like a covert love letter to these places. I hope that their residents see it that way. Definitely with Lies We Bury, I included the Portland Shanghai tunnels, which I'm fascinated by, and their history. And I went into them a few years ago, which was really fun and uncomfortable. I discovered I dislike underground settings personally. And I also included strip clubs in my story, because Portland, Oregon, I think has the most strip clubs in the country. I think I'll have to check my stats on that, but it's a not as widely known fact about Portland as other, like say, the breweries per capita that Portland has, which are also significant, which also make an appearance in Lies We Bury. But I tried to include little jokes like that in the novel, little cameos, and tried to make Portland come alive as best that I could, while also staying true to the Portland that I know and that I think Portlanders will appreciate.
Yeah, I learned so much. I mean, I've never been. It's sort of on my list. It's Powell's bookstore, right?
Yes.
And there's a scene set there in the book, and I loved that because a couple of years ago, somebody gave me a gift card, and I keep not using it online because I'm like, someday I will get there. It hasn't happened yet, but it's kind of cool when those things, show up. And that was a point of reference for me. I don't know the bars or the strip clubs, but I knew the bookstore.
Yeah, exactly. That's wonderful. That's exactly what I want. And Powell's is amazing. I love Powell's. You should definitely go there in person at some point soon.
Plan one of these years.
Eventually, it's fantastic.
Yeah. What I hear. So I wanted to ask you too. So the narrative, it alternates time between past and present, and I always think that that's a really interesting construct for a book. And I wanted to ask you, what compels you to use that structure? And then I don't know if you're a plotter or a pantser, but I would assume with that kind of non-linear storytelling that you have to do a little bit more plotting to know where your story is going to go. So I was wondering if you could just sort of touch on that for a moment.
Yes, I am definitely a plotter by necessity. If I could just write endlessly and still make good use of my time, I would. I really love the exploration and just pantsing and just writing stream of consciousness. But because I I have other things to accomplish and deadlines to meet, I am a plotter now. And I employed the past chapters and the present chapters. I employed the different timelines in an effort to really examine the horrors of what went on in the basement, but from a perspective that hopefully readers found bearable, right? Because if we, I mean, I don't know that I could read something that terrifying from an adult, totally aware perspective. I mean, I'm sure I have, but I really wanted to balance the fear that Marissa was experiencing in present time with an explanation of what happened to her as a child in the basement, really just growing up in the basement. That's what I mean. While tempering the reality of what that meant for them on a daily basis.
Sure, sure. And I wanted to ask you too, I think books, fiction, even nonfiction, obviously, sort of give us the ability to experience things that we might not otherwise, people, places, cultures. And I know that that's something that you're really interested in, is exploring diversity and sort of the multicultural experience. And I was wondering, if you can talk about how you draw on that, your own experiences, and bring that into the book for readers who might not otherwise have an opportunity to visit those worlds, maybe especially now since so many of us haven't really left our homes.
Yes, and that's exactly that's what I set out to do with writing. I think it's so important to um, provide windows into other, I don't know, cultures, whether that's a ranch in Wyoming or Chinatown in San Francisco, or in Paris, in the Paris, France, in the Paris catacombs. I really love reading books that transport me to another place that I might not be familiar with. So I attempt to do that in my writing, definitely. And I also feel a passion for using and highlighting characters that might not look like me or that also do look like me, just in the effort to create a more diverse set of characters, and also to reflect the world that I live in, which is a pretty diverse city and country and culture. I lived in France for 3 years, and I was struck by the incredible diversity that the United States has, that American culture has, even without us realizing it, and feeling very grateful for that while I was living abroad. Um, so I try to reflect that in my writing, both to create windows into other worlds, and then also to um, create more characters that maybe I didn't read so much growing up, whether they weren't available or I didn't happen upon them. But it's really important for me to have that wide array of characters.
Sure. And I love that as a reader too, because I might not be able to, leave my little house or my little town, but through a book, I can, really travel anywhere and hopefully have a better understanding or more empathy for, a different situation than my own.
Exactly.
Yeah. So next question, and I feel like I could have tacked this on when we were talking about plotting or pantsing because I have, but I wanted to ask you, so this is your second, published novel, and I wanted to, sort of get your thoughts on the experience of writing this book versus your first book, because I would assume, now there's deadlines, there's expectations, you don't necessarily have the freedom that you might have before to get the book just the way you wanted it in the time you needed to do that. So can you sort of reflect on the experience of writing this book versus your first one?
Yes, that's a great prompt. They are completely different. They were completely different experiences. I wrote The Missing Sister first and foremost for myself, and then I began to craft it and edit it into something that other people might enjoy as well. And I worked on The Missing Sister for about 3 years by myself. And then I signed with my literary agents, and then we sold the book to my publisher, Thomas and Mercer. And then I was really just grateful and pleased with the editorial work that I did with my editor. So The Missing Sister started out as exactly what we talked about earlier, where I just kind of meandered and I wrote the story for myself, and I included little landmarks for myself in Paris that I loved. And then with my editor, we really reined it back in. And then for Lies We Bury, let me step back. I signed a 2-book deal with Thomas and Mercer. So the first book I already had written, it was The Missing Sister. The second book I had not written at all, Lies We Bury. And so I had to really go from pantsing and thriving in that to ensuring that my editing counted, that my writing counted, that I could knock out a book in less than 3 years, as I had done previously. Ended up writing Lies We Bury, I think, over a year, probably writing and editing over a year, writing it much less than that. But um, it's, I'm very grateful for having the experience, for being able to have had the freedom to write to my heart's content and go down all of the rabbit holes. And then to also learn and hone the skill of writing on a deadline, of being able to produce a story that I'm passionate about, that I still think is a great story, um, in order to share with other people, which I'm also really grateful that I can do.
Sure, sure. And so, you also sort of have the dubious distinction of now having two books come out amid a pandemic. So I wanted to ask you, can you talk about sort of the emotional and logistical challenges of that, but also how I would assume it also has to sort of foster a greater creativity and sort of outside the box thinking. So I'm wondering if you can, tell us about that.
Yes, last year, my release date for The Missing Sister was actually April 1st as well. So my release date for both my books is April 1st. And so last April 1st, I was thinking, wow, I can't wait till next year when I can actually do in-person events for Lies We Bury. And lo and behold, here we are, still not doing in-person events for my book, at least. So it's been an emotional experience, as it has for everyone, but particularly for the publishing journey. You work so many years, you dream, you plot, you scheme,
Right.
um, for what you imagine this might be like, publishing your novel, and then it's a lot different. It's a little different, but in the same sense, it has been just really exceptional, the different people that I've been able to connect with virtually, much like yourself, in Central Booking, that I'm very grateful for. That this says, the pandemic, with regard to publishing, the pandemic has caused promotion and marketing to really open up doors virtually, so that authors can connect with other people more frequently, and maybe with less hesitation online, via Zoom or whatever platform that people use. So I've been surprised by that. That's been a surprising silver lining in my publishing journey. But again, it's not what anyone expects when they finally become a published author, right?
It's
So
kind of funny because the dream is to, go out and mingle with people because you spend so much time alone with your computer and then here you are again at your computer.
yes, writing is such a solitary activity, right? Like, I mean, do you ever write in partnership with someone else, or maybe did you ever write across from someone, like write-ins?
Every once in a while, and it just never tends to work out. But I don't do enough creative writing. It's more like profiles and reviews, which are probably my excuses not to, write novels and short stories. But I get
You
to
know,
talk to
it's
cool
all
people
creative
like you.
writing.
So that's
It's all part of the same umbrella.
right. I just keep telling people it's research. This is all a very extended research process because I learned so much. So
Exactly. Your next book's protagonist is going to be a book reviewer.
that's right. I have this idea. It might be. All right. So I have to ask you, a couple more questions if you don't mind. But you've sort of been hit with the two P's, pandemic, obviously, but also parenting, which I'm sure has changed your approach to things. So I was wondering if you can, talk about how not only you've adjusted to the new normal of doing this in a pandemic, but also being a mom or a parent, because I'm sure that, throws a lot of structure out the window.
Yes, it does, John. Yes, it does. It's been the most magical year of my life, and surprising in so many ways. But I became a mother. I gave birth to my son last year, the very beginning of 2020. So I published my first novel, and was also um, raising a baby. So all structure that had previously been in place is long gone. Um, I used to be able to, of course, write whenever I wanted or late into the night, and now I very happily wake up and write before my baby gets up, and then sneak in pockets during the day of where I can write, maybe during nap times, and then write after he goes to bed. We're very fortunate in that he sleeps through the night. So he is a little over a year old now, and very, very fortunate. I was so grateful that he was such a good sleeper last year while I was promoting The Missing Sister, and then also while I was editing Lies We Bury. Um, he's been the perfect pandemic baby, so no complaints
Oh,
here.
knock on wood, that's awesome. That's great. He's a good sleeper, so you cannot sleep, but you're productive. So there's that.
Exactly.
All right, final two questions for you. So first, I have to ask, sort of a crafty question because a lot of people, want to know. So my question to you on that is, what is the best advice that you ever got in terms of a creative life or a writing life? And then the best advice that you never got and had to figure out for yourself and wish that maybe somebody could have told you sooner.
Ooh, the best writing advice I've heard is to write every day, which seems daunting at first, right? Forming a habit takes, I think, 3 weeks, and so the first 3 weeks are hard, but then you find that writing every day really just comes so naturally, and that's where the ideas, the big ideas or the big edits that I've made that have been my light bulb moments have come really when I'm in the zone and just writing consistently. So I would say write every day. And then the advice I never received that I wish I had, um, I would say actually, two things. Um, be aware if you are, I think, regardless of the genre that you write in, people will assume that you are writing an autobiographical work. Some elements will be assumed as autobiographical work, and so I would say just heads up there. You'll receive oddball questions, but it's just because people like your work. And particularly as a thriller author, I found that very I won't say amusing, but strange, surprising. Yeah, I've been surprised by some of the questions, but and then the other bit of advice I would say I wasn't given, but I would have loved to have had, was to, I think, trust yourself as a reader first. If you are not intrigued by what you're writing, if you're not compelled to turn the page yourself, the reader likely will not be. So I would say don't forget to trust yourself, even though there are all these different markets or people that you're trying to please. Don't forget to have one or two trusted readers, but primarily yourself. If you're excited by something, someone else will be as well.
That's great advice. And notice I did not ask you, if you were raised in captivity underground. I just assumed not, or it was
Thank
none of
you.
my business.
Thank you for not asking
Of
that.
course. Someone will,
Someone will, but not you, John.
not me, man. All right. So final question. I know that you already have book 3 slated for, next spring, 2022, which will hopefully be a much better time for everybody. But I'm just wondering if you can give us a little teaser about what we can expect then.
Yes. The book is titled Strangers We Know. I'm very excited about that title. It's inspired by DNA testing, and a woman, an adopted woman, takes a DNA test to learn more about her background, and is then contacted by the FBI saying that she may be related to a serial killer, and would she please assist the FBI by going and speaking with her family. So it's again inspired by true crime headlines that have existed in the past, uh, and also the advent of DNA testing, genealogy testing, something I have done, and that was actually inspired by a lot of different things, but also my personal experience doing DNA testing and meeting my own biological family. I am not adopted, but my mother is. And so we had the gift of going and meeting her biological family together. And so it is an own voices story. and at the same time drawing on some of, again, the most, I think, compelling bits of true crime that we have seen in recent years, with some similarities to the Golden State Killer case as well, because Joseph James DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer, was found and identified with the assistance of DNA testing. So there are a lot of different elements in this story. I'm very excited about it. I'm actually editing it now. I'm going to be turning it into my editor in a few weeks. But it's, something near and dear to my heart, and that is something that I have shades of which I have lived myself, but I'm not related to anyone of that nature. And also, it's something that I think, people have been intrigued by.
Right, sure.
Where, what do we gain from DNA testing exactly? And then how is that information used once we submit it to someone else? What is done with that information?
Right.
So there's a lot of different questions that the story kind of explores.
Wow, that's a great premise. I already can't wait. See, you're giving us things to look forward to, which is a beautiful thing these days. Well, thank you so much, Elle Marr. I got to say, again, the book is Lies We Bury. It's out Thursday, April 1st from Thomas and Mercer. You can pre-order it though, but
Yes,
really, really great book. And it was so nice to meet you after enjoying your book so much. So I appreciate you doing the show, and I wish you luck with the book.
absolutely. Thank you so much. My pleasure for being here. Thank you for having me. I loved talking about writing with you, and hope to see you again soon.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.